This is Making a Scientist, the podcast by young scientists for young scientists, featuring cutting-edge science and all of the life and work advice that you'll ever need to succeed. It's brought alive by brilliant scientists and hosted by me, Alex Ainsko. How do you train the next generation of scientists and doctors? Well, this week my guest is Dr Garrick Wilson, who is the Convergence Science Training Programme Manager at the Cancer Research UK Convergence Science Centre. This is a man whose job is to literally ask, how do you make a scientist? In this episode, Garrick shares his thoughts and opinions on how to develop the next generation of scientists and what to look for in a prospective mentor. He also recounts how he felt during his PhD interview, gives some incredible interview advice, and gives us a flavour of what life was like growing up in Jamaica before he moved to the UK to study. Garrick gives very personal accounts of his thoughts and feelings at various points throughout his career, and the episode is brimming full of amazing advice and I can't wait to share it. So without further ado, let's begin. Dr. Garrick Wilson, thank you very, very much for joining us today. So I'd like to begin by talking about what your current contribution to research is. So I understand that you're a Convergence Science Training Programme Manager for PhD students at Imperial College. Would you be able to discuss what that implies?
Sure, thank you, Alex. It's good to be here. As you've said, I'm Garrick. I operate this program called Convergence Science across Imperial College London and the Institute of Cancer Research. And really, it's about tackling or addressing the big problems in cancer. As we know, cancer affects everyone either directly or indirectly. And that if it hasn't directly affected you, you'll know somebody that has been affected by cancer. And so in Convergence, what we mean, we're talking about the merging or the amalgamation of different parts of sciences to address problems in cancer. So it's merging engineering, physics, chemistry, computer sciences with the clinical and biological sciences. And this is how we come up with some of the amazing discoveries that we have in terms of detecting cancer and also treating cancer. So that's really what it's about. Specifically, what I look at
just to maybe ask, why do you need to merge disciplines? What's wrong with disciplines as they are?
Disciplines as they are, when we have people sitting in their own, unique silos, and this is something that has frustrated me through my time in science. When people sit in their own little unique silos, I find that it makes progress slower. I also find that in terms of training an individual to become a good scientist, it actually is an hindrance, keeping them totally siloed in a very unique way. It doesn't open up the career opportunities that they could possibly have if they were trained in multiple disciplines, for example. Also doesn't allow them to think much more broadly as to taking on different philosophies, different areas of science that could impact in a greater, more significant way what they're trying to do. What we find with convergent science, especially in cancer research, is that some of the big problems that we've been trying to address for years, just as biologists looking at the problem purely from a biological perspective, are now being accelerated and revolutionized just by bringing on an engineer on board, for example. Notable discoveries, you may have heard of the intelligent knife, the eye knife, which is a scalpel for cancer surgery, which was really... It's a CRUK funded project, and it was really now the merging of analytical chemistry, engineering, clinical biology, and they all come together to develop this wonderful scalpel that can give you accurate information as to whether or not a surgeon has dissected all or most of a tumor when they have a patient on their surgical table, which you wouldn't be able to get using conventional tools. So again, that's just an example of when you merge disciplines and put great minds together, the kind of discoveries and technologies that can be developed from that.
So are convergent science training programs a normal thing?
Not at all. I think outside what we are doing, the only other people who are naming it as such are people at MIT in the United States. We do.
So that's Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
That's
right?
the one, yes, over there in Boston, Massachusetts, yes. They're the only ones who are doing it. We've started this in the UK to look specifically at cancer. So they may be looking more broadly or looking at other things, but we're looking specifically at cancer here. And this is what makes it very exciting, in that what we're bringing together as part of this as well is not just convergence in terms of the sciences, it's convergence in terms of two world-leading research institutions, in this case Imperial College London and the Institute of Cancer Research. And the thing about the Institute of Cancer Research is that they're a comprehensive cancer research center. That's all they're focused on. And so when we get all the expertise from there, and we get the engineering and the physical sciences expertise from Imperial, and we're putting all these people together to really just come up with some exciting ways and tools, methodologies, whatever it may be, to really benefit cancer patients. And that's what the focus is all about. And then on top of that as well, you're bringing in two NHS trusts here. We've got the Royal Marsden NHS Trust, which is linked to the Institute of Cancer Research, and the Imperial NHS Trust, which is linked to Imperial College London. So you bring all of this expertise together under one umbrella of convergence science, and the possibilities, I think, are exciting and they are endless.
Wow, no, it certainly sounds incredibly impressive. But I do wonder, and we do try to stay somewhat apolitical on this podcast, but there was a certain high-profile politician who mentioned that the public have had enough of experts, and with this convergent science training program, I just wonder whether there's a danger of, instead of becoming an expert in one field, are you a jack of all trades, master of none?
Very good question, and something that we ourselves have considered as well. And the answer is no. You are going to be rounded in exactly everything you do. So the way that this is set up, it's not as per your conventional PhD where you have perhaps a primary and a secondary supervisor. Here you will have joint supervisors with equal weighing and contribution towards the project. That means that we'll have different supervisors who are experts in different fields. And just the way that they work, they have to come together and actively put together a work plan that the student will have to follow. The student will spend equal amount of time working with both supervisors. So it's not that maybe I'll go and do a random experiment in engineering and see how that will contribute to some results that I've spent 2 years getting in a biology lab. Not at all. Your time must be equally distributed across the different labs. And on top of that as well, we have specifically designed a training program which breaks down language barriers between disciplines, where we, I suppose you could say quite experimentally, put clinicians, engineers, physicists in the same room, give them a common problem, and they all have to work together to solve that problem, even though they speak a different language. So that helps us to break down those language barriers that they may have between them and come up with one common language that we say, okay, this is the convergence language that we speak. And as a result, what we're finding is that people are now well-rounded. People are coming out of this with a good grasp on engineering, a very good grasp on chemistry, very good grasp on physics, and also very good grasp on biology. And in terms of our recruitment strategy, we are recruiting students not just from a biological background to look at cancer. We can look at a student who was trained at undergraduate level in computer science, engineering.
Oh, good. This was about to be my next question. To be selected for one of these convergent science programs, there's probably, hopefully, a lot of A-level students, master's students, BSc students, all listening to this, and they're thinking, your program sounds incredible. I want to be that next convergent scientist, but what are the entry requirements? Because typical undergraduate degrees are, as you well know, are just either biology or biochemistry, potentially, if you want to, go out, push the boat and then merge a couple of disciplines. But then similarly, it's the same for undergraduate. You're only going to have done maths, chemistry, biology. So how do you go about selecting these people for your program?
Well, we look for brilliant candidates all over. And a lot of these candidates as well that we have typically go on to take on a master's degree. And you'd be surprised to actually realize the amount of people who are taking on master's degrees in engineering, whether it be mechanical engineering, electronic engineering, bioengineering, whatever it may be. So we're pretty interested in reaching out to these people, and people who are trained at undergraduate level in things like chemistry and physics as well. They are also applicants that we normally target, as well as people who are trained in computer science, because I think artificial intelligence is just one of those exciting areas that is emerging at the moment, and there's quite a lot of scope there, especially within cancer research. So my simple answer to it is, if you were trained in a science, it doesn't matter which science it is, a core science subject, whether it be mathematics, engineering, physics, whatever it may be, you have a great chance, providing you're interested in cancer, and you have got a quality mark in terms of your qualifications level, etc. You have a great chance of getting onto our PhD program.
Yeah, again, it truly sounds incredibly impressive. And you mentioned about the AI technology, and I do believe it was from Imperial that there was the AI program that they took a lot of scans of lungs, I think it was. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know this a lot better than me, but they took all of these scans of lungs and basically they built a program that diagnoses these scans a lot better than a clinician ever could. And with higher accuracy and in a much more high throughput way. So I totally see this merging in disciplines, but I do wonder, when you come to select for your program, let's say, I'm not sure how many spots you have open any one particular year, let's say 10, but do you select 2 biologists who do undergraduate degrees, 2 chemists, or is it just based upon the applicant pool in any particular year?
So 2 things. The discovery that you mentioned there in terms of artificial intelligence, it was a breast cancer setting, and
Breast cancer, right?
where we have artificial intelligence basically outperforming, I think it was 6 radiologists in terms of diagnosing,
Wow.
or accurately diagnosing scans for breast cancer. So I think,
crazy.
again, that is just incredible. It's just a great example of some of the things that the artificial intelligence thing is just pushing the borders and the boundaries. In terms of selecting applicants, we don't have a criteria to say we will select you based on your background. We will select you. What we do, we have a very sort of bespoke recruitment process. And what we do annually is launch a number of projects on famous websites out there. And, applicants who are interested can go on, look what these projects are, and submit an application to us. When those applications come through, what we're really trying to get from an applicant is, why convergent science? Why does that interest you? How much have you actually read about this, and how has your current or past experience actually prepares you or position you well for undertaking a convergent science research project? And really, when we look at that as well as academic performance, that's sort of how we shortlist candidates through an independent shortlisting process, which is a long thing, which I won't go through right now.
Sure.
And so it may end up that actually, based on that, we will have applicants who are coming through, and none of them may be from a biological background. Likewise, all of them may be from a biological background, because we're just looking for the best people who are able to show us on paper, based on what they're asked during the application process, that actually they're really interested in this, their motivations are right, and actually they are showing some an initiative in that they actually can undertake this and they want to undertake it. And I'll say as well, when you select somebody to be your reference when applying for a PhD, make sure you select the right people, because oftentimes you can read between the lines of what a referee may say. We don't just look at what they say, but what's missing is also quite telling. So make sure you really, when you're going for referees, don't just say to them, I've applied to this program, I'd like you to give me a reference. Tell them exactly what it is that you'd like them to say. Tell them how you've built that application, how you're trying to come across, and you'd like for them to reinforce that and to convince the selection panel that actually you are the right person for it. So yes, we don't have an exclusion criteria to say 2 biology and 2 chemists, for example. Not at all. If you meet the bar, it matters not what background you're from.
So anybody who's listening to this, if you're out there, if you're looking for a PhD, I would highly recommend you check out this program from Dr. Wilson. Please, I'm sure he'd be very happy to answer any of your queries. You can email him, and I'm sure he'd be very happy to get back to you on that. Just
briefly, if you just want to have a flavour of our training program, you can go to convergencesciencecentre.ac.uk. That's convergencesciencecentre.ac.uk, and then you can see all of our training programs on there. And if you don't mind me saying, Alex, there are several strands to it. What we have is what we call our non-clinical scheme, which is for individuals who do not have a clinical background. So that's one strand of it. And then we have a clinical scheme as well, that's split into 2 parts. So firstly, we have your typical clinical research fellowship training route, which this is for clinicians already within their career pathway who would like to then take a break and undertake a PhD. But then we also have, because we're thinking futuristically now, we also have what we call the intercalated PhD option.
So what's one of them?
So this is basically where you take gifted medical undergraduates, individuals who are currently studying medicine at undergraduate level, and actually give them the opportunity to pause their medical studies for 3 years to undertake a PhD in cancer. And the idea here is at the end of the PhD period, they can just pick up their medical course where they left off. So we usually take them at the end of year 4 of their medical undergraduate degree and 3-year PhD, and then they rejoin their medical course in year 5. And the idea here is that we're thinking about the future oncologists, those future cancer doctors. And if we can get them and train them as early as possible and get their interest piqued or tweaked by cancer or even cancer research, then we end up with clinical academics who are interested in cancer, and also we end up with some of the best cancer physicians that are going to be in the clinic helping patients in the future. And this is important because currently, as part of the rotational process that you go through as a young medic, cancer or oncology is not part of that process. So then to go off later and specialize in that area is a much more difficult thing. So if you can give this to you as part of your degree training, I think it will help in that area. And great, guess what? You leave university with 2 degrees. You leave with your medical degree, you leave with your PhD in cancer research. And again, this will be in Convergence Science. And what else is amazing about this? It comes fully funded, so you won't just get your fees and your stipend and research money as part of your PhD. As part of this as well, we are underwriting your entire undergraduate fees that you would have paid throughout your medical school year. So all of that is covered, and you will leave university hopefully debt-free.
Wow. So there you go. There's non-clinical, clinical routes, all these fantastic training opportunities. Yeah, check it out. Certainly check it out. So our next section is called When You Were Young. So, Garrick, where did you grow up and where are you from?
I grew up in Jamaica, a sunny island in the Caribbean, the best island in the Caribbean. Yes, we are just about, where are we now? We're just about 90 miles south of Cuba. Great place to have been. I would say I was a rude child. I was very difficult to control. I loved growing up. Yeah, I really loved growing up in Jamaica. I remember the school that I used to go to. Used to love school, and I remember from the very outset, I would do well in science. And science, at that point, it was basic stuff. It was just biology, and maybe you get to do a bit of chemistry. That was science for us. But for whatever reason, it clicked with me, and I loved it. And I didn't pay as much attention in my other lessons, like English, and we had to do Spanish as well, and all those kind of other things. And being Jamaica as well, doing science, we had to do what we call agricultural sciences as well.
Because we don't do that here in the UK. What's that?
It's literally plant science, and as part of that, you get an entire project where you're given a plot of land and various seeds of various kinds to go and sow them and make something out of it. And just be aware of the ecosystem, be aware of all the ecology and the wildlife and the insects and everything else that goes with that. Be aware of the pros and cons of using certain types of pesticides or fertilizers. It was just a little child to raise. That was your own.
Oh, wow.
That's what it was. And it was exciting stuff. So that was part of it. And we had.
We kind of have that in the UK on a much smaller scale, but then it's usually a hobby of sort of older folks and allotments.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think that it's part of the curriculum yet, but it sounds like something that would have been seriously interesting. Your own little baby to grow. That would have been really cool.
It was great, and then on top of that as well, they were giving us real skills, because in case anyone wanted to go off and do farming as a career, that was a good possibility, because you get all the core skills and training there as part of agricultural sciences in school. And then other interesting things we used to do as well, we used to do carpentry, because they were giving us practical skills as well. So I recall I used to make chairs and tables. I was very good at making chairs and tables.
Oh, wow.
My measurements and my dimensions were pretty good.
So you were precise, this precise nature that you had even shone through in other disciplines. We were talking about convergent science before. There we go.
That's where I got it from. And then we had to do metal work as well, how to weld things together and make metal pliable and stick things together to make something out of them. So we had all these transferable skills that we had to do as part of school. And the one that I was ridiculous at was arts and craft. I couldn't draw, sketch, paint to save my life at all. Those are some of the things that made those days interesting. Actually, here's the other interesting one. We had this course called Home Economics, and it's basically about how to keep a home. So we'd have to do things like learn to cook at school, not the basic stuff. We'd literally cook 3-course meals and set them up for the teachers to come and taste and judge. We'd literally learn baking skills and things like that. What the best disinfectant is and so on and so forth to use to clean the kitchen and the bathroom and all these kind of things. So they really put us through our paces.
Wow.
School days were interesting.
So at school, I believe you were heavily involved in sports as well?
Yes, so athletics was my thing.
Yeah.
And, I think it comes as no surprise to anyone that Jamaica is known for its athletes, its sprinters.
Yeah.
We don't really bother with this marathon stuff. Who's got time for that? If you're going to do the thing, get it overdone quickly, huh? And by the way, Cool Runnings is rubbish.
You said it, not me.
It's not a real Jamaican accent, so don't be fooled by that. It was funny nonetheless. It was funny. But athletics was the thing. We used to have this thing called champs, which is short for championships, and it was an annual event that took place where you have different schools from Jamaica showcasing their best talent in athletics. And as a result, we gather at the National Stadium, and there will be this competition where we go through the heats, the semi-finals, and then eventually to the finals, pretty much like the Olympic setup. And basically, schools are competing to win the 100 meters, the 200 meters, the 150 meters, the hurdles. And we didn't go over 800 meters. That's where we stopped, because as I said, this is sprinting. This is not a marathon, and all those things. And I used to do pretty well at that. I was incredibly good at it, and I think those were some of my favorite times in life, just running. Not running from anything in particular, but just the ability to just move. And I think Jamaica had a lot of open space that just allowed one to do that. And given that you're growing up as a child and all you're seeing on the TV are these Olympic heroes, everybody wanted to be like them. If you didn't want to be a sprinter, you wanted to be a cricketer, because it was either cricket or sprinting for us. That was part of my school years as well.
Definitely. I mean, it's not that, when so sometimes not all Americans believe that everyone in the UK knows each other. I'm sure that everyone in Jamaica doesn't necessarily know each other, but you rubbed shoulders with Usain Bolt as a sprinter, right?
Yeah, Usain is a great guy. Everyone in Jamaica knows each other. May not know each other personally, but usually one way we identify a person in Jamaica is basically by their surname. Because if you get a surname, you can just basically relate it back to, so for example, somebody will be speaking to me and say, oh, you're a Wilson. And they're like, oh, do you know a Mr. Samuel Wilson from just round there? And I was like, oh yes, that's my cousin. And then they will say, oh, he's related to so and so, and then they will trace back your entire ancestry to 1718 or something like that. So that way everyone's kind of connected. But you're saying he was a big competitor back in the day. When we were doing school championships and things like that. He was a big competitor back in the day, and I reckon that if I'd stuck with it, I would have beaten him. I would have probably, I don't know, advanced or passed him where he's right now.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure as well. No, he's a great guy, and he's been a great ambassador for our country. But I remember him as this skinny guy just coming up, as was I then, this skinny kid coming up through the championships relationships and just how he's gone on and just basically taken over the world and inspired a lot of people. It's just amazing to see. I sometimes wondered if I took the wrong career path.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've done incredibly well for yourself since, and I suppose I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. So, your route after school, you then obviously, in order to get a PhD, you must have done an undergraduate degree. So, what did you study as an undergraduate, and where did you go to?
So I studied biochemistry. That was my undergraduate degree. I was at Nottingham University. And again, it seems like I was interested in convergence from there, because it was really the convergence of biology and chemistry for that degree. And I loved that degree. I really loved it. University was an interesting experience because coming from another country, I'm coming here, the educational setup was very different.
So did you move? Sorry, did you move directly for university then? You moved.
I was
Jamaica to
kidnapped.
start
I didn't
university?
move. I was kidnapped. My mom kidnapped me. So my mom was working here prior, and she had a role here, and then she sort of got me over here as part of that as well. Didn't have a say in the matter, and my passport was hidden for about a year. So any thoughts of getting up and flying back home was pretty much destroyed. So that's why I said I was kidnapped. I think when you hold somebody's passport, it's a kidnapping situation. Uni life was interesting. I think being there, I think one of the first thing that was obvious, I don't know if you mind me saying this, but I don't mind saying it. In case the audience is listening on, I'm a black man speaking here, and by virtue of being from Jamaica, you probably would have figured that out already. And one thing that was very apparent is that I was the only black person on the course. And
wow.
It was very, very obvious. Not because of the conspicuous nature of, you see that guy, you can't miss him, he's conspicuously obvious. It's also I would say it was a difference of culture, a difference of understanding.
Like how do you mean?
In that, it's uni life. A lot of people go to uni not just for the experience of learning, but everything else that comes along with that as well. So the social aspects and everything like that. I was coming from a very different background in terms of how you socialized. In other words, drinking until you're plastered and falling out. That wasn't like, I would sit there and scratch my head and like, why would you want to do that? Like, really?
I think it's you and the rest of the world at the
basically
UK.
That's what it was. Yeah. Like, and also,
Yeah.
it's a cold country, wrap up. And at the same time, I'd see people going out on a Friday. They couldn't wait to go out, and people were literally dressed in next to nothing, clearly freezing because they're doing all the shakes and everything like that. And yet it seems to be okay to get on and do that. So for a while, it was just very hard to try and, understand why that was the case, fit there and be comfortable. And I was doing well academically. I wasn't sure that I was doing so well in terms of the social aspects of it. Eventually it turned into this thing, and I don't know how it got there, whereby I became almost that agony uncle. If people haven't said, you know what, it's Garrick is the sensible person to go to. Let's have a conversation with him. You know what, all of us were plastered and drunk. Let's go talk to Garrick because, I can't get the answers or the clarity that I need from somebody who's pretty much thinking about the situation same as I have. And that was a great lesson in leadership. And the lesson was this: you can't lead anyone effectively who's thinking exactly the same way that you are. You can't advise anyone effectively if you've just been in the same situation that they've gone through, because we're all doing this together. What makes you think that you can basically offer me advice on something that you're doing as well? And that was the lesson right there. And, that's how I started to find my place in becoming comfortable in saying, this is me, understanding what I had to offer, and made the best use of that. And, after that, uni just turned out to be great. Made a lot of friends, became a bit more settled, tried to understand a bit more, learn the language, and so on and so forth. And I left, graduated first class degree, and that was great.
Well done. Good, congratulations. So, one thing I was just wondering is, how were you? I mean, obviously, it must have been very difficult for you. It's different, different culture, different environment, and everything. But how were you received by your fellow classmates? Did you feel like you were particularly left out, or were they welcoming, or how did it go down?
I found that they were very intrigued and curious, if nothing else. They I didn't always speak like this, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I've only known you. Well, I mean, we've known each other for quite a while now, coming up to 6 or 7 years. But yeah, I've only known you speak like this.
Yeah,
So,
I didn't always speak like this. At one point, I had a very good Jamaican accent, incredible. It's like just to get a lot of attention. And
you'll have to dig out a home video from somewhere and show me.
We are talking about, man. Anyways, no,
Yeah.
but that would get people around me, and just for the virtue of just wanting to hear something that I say or to pronounce a particular word. I found that the students were incredibly receptive. I had no issues there. I found, I'm not going to say the faculty, but individuals within the faculty perhaps not as receptive. And I think that's something that's improved over time. So this is not me casting aspersions at a certain institution, not at all. I do think the experience by and large was great, but you did have like the odd individual. I remember, for example, first day in, one of the lecturers challenged me saying, one, are you in the right place? Are you sure you're in the right place? And I don't think that was the way to start a conversation.
No, definitely not. Yeah. Gosh.
And, you can infer all you want from that, but clearly there's only one correct inference. And secondly, that person proceeded to have an argument with me about whether or not I'd correctly spelt my name. At that time, I was 18 years old, and I think I carried this name for 18 years. If anybody knows how to spell it, it would be me. And the response to that was simply, "Ooh, so you're being aggressive now," which was, anyways. But it by and large, the experience was good, and I think for me as well, it was great because I think as a black man growing up in the UK, it's very good to see how everyone else is thinking, see how society operates, get to know individuals who don't necessarily think the same way as you and look the same way as you. And over time, you actually realize people are people. And just get on with people.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, these experiences. It's you mentioned before that you were a black guy. I'm a white guy. Just for people who don't already know from the podcast. So, I haven't ever experienced anything like this, so I can never possibly really understand. So thank you very much for sharing this. This is for any young black people out there listening to this. I hope it gives you courage to talk and to hear that you're not alone in going through whatever it is that you may be going through. So I wanted to discuss then the decision process that you made when you were finishing or coming up to finish your undergraduate degree, and then trying to decide what you did next. What were you thinking about?
I love science. I think that has never been an issue, and so for me, the next logical step was to further pursue science. But what exactly? Which area of science?
But this was always in an academic sense. It was you never thought that you were going to go off to industry and to work as a scientist.
Not at all. I think for me, the way my mind works, I like to think about things, and just sort of that ability to have sort of blue sky thinking and really explore the problem and create solutions. I'm quite a solution focused individual. I think just that discipline that comes through science was something that was always attractive to me, and that's something that I endeavored to pursue. I looked at many PhD options, and God, I applied for a couple, and I went to 2 interviews, and gosh, I was dismal. I was terrible. I was absolutely terrible. I worked myself up into such a mess that I walked away from those interviews, and looking back at them now, I feel so ashamed. I think at one point,
it's a learning process. Everybody feels like that.
It is, and then after performing badly at those two, I could have taken the view that at least I'm getting called out for interviews, therefore I'm actually looking pretty good on paper, or I could have taken the view of actually no, I'm terrible at interviews, like stop. I actually took the latter. I'm terrible at interviews, so stopped.
Oh no, and that's not good.
I was basically there wondering, okay, so what next? And I thought what I'd do is just go off for a year, just take a gap year and just, get some calibration and some perspective on life. But in the process of doing that, what actually happened was I went online and I saw this PhD project advertised at the University of Birmingham. And for whatever reason, it spoke to me. I just looked at it and it just really spoke to me. And but you know what was funny about that? The day I saw it, the deadline was the day before. So I actually missed the deadline already.
Oh, what?
Yeah. And okay. I left it. But that night before going to sleep, something said to me, you know what, send an email. And so I sent an email, didn't expect to hear anything back. And I think it was a week or so later where this person responded to me and said, I've put your application before the project supervisors and they'd really like to have a conversation with you.
Oh, nice. Well, I suppose that's a really important lesson to anyone listening. You if your hat isn't in the ring, then you've definitely not got a chance. If you don't shoot your shot, you're never going to score. So even if you were a little bit late, I'm really glad that you just did it anyway. Yeah, just submit it and see what happens. The worst that could happen is you don't get a response, right? So
and that doesn't really change your life. You're still in the same position. Exactly. If they say yes, but you're right. I think if you see something, don't even look at things such as the deadline is gone or I don't meet the tick boxes or anything like that. If it genuinely appeals to you, put that application in, and somehow in that application make sure that you convey your enthusiasm, you convey your interest. And I think sometimes we count ourselves out of things based on whether or not we think we are right for it on paper, as opposed to the fact that, you know what, in my heart of hearts, I actually believe that I could do this. And it was just that reason why I decided to submit, although late. And they wanted to see me. And what was interesting was we go to these things and we normally dress up and look very formal. And the professor on that project, she said to me, no, come, just let me see how you dress normally in everyday life. And I like that idea because in truth, nobody going into a research lab is going to be walking in day after day wearing suit and tie. So to go to an interview process to put on a show, a parade, and a performance, when in fact it's not like that, it just puts a lot of stress around the thing. And that's what I would say to those who are recruiting for students: create a much more relaxed atmosphere. Tell people to come as they are, as they would be, and just have a friendly chat and friendly conversation. And that's what it was. And I recall walking into that interview situation, and I was sitting there, and the supervisor on this is known as one of the world's top 10 most influential virologists, and also the most renowned histopathologist in Europe.
Sorry, what's a histopathologist?
An histopathologist is basically a pathologist that basically is expert in things at a cellular level. In particular, this person is an expert in hepatocellular carcinoma, which is an aggressive form of liver cancer. So the project in question here was looking at the impact of hepatitis C, hepatitis B viruses on the liver, especially to the onset of liver cancer. And so what we had was a virology expert on the virus side, and of course the pathologist who is the expert on the cancer of the liver side. So are these two impressive people there, and ultimately I think a skill that I learned in that moment, and I think it was partly shaped through how they decided to conduct the interview, was that interviews should never be about interrogation. And if you approach them from the perspective of I'm being interrogated, you will fail ultimately. And that's why I messed up at the initial two. And this became a conversation instead. It was a back and forth dialogue as opposed to a call and response. They say something and I have to respond. No, this was a genuine dialogue where we sat, We spoke about science and why we're passionate about science. We spoke about life and where we're coming from and what experiences that we had that has led us to this particular point. She, at that point, has just left, the professor of virology, just left Rockefeller University in the United States, and she's now settling back in the UK. Spoke through that transition and ultimately what the goals were, where she was going with things, because she was a big thing. She was publishing in Nature, Science, and all the big journals out there. And she had this reputation and this clout. And we had this conversation. They start asking questions, and such as, what was the worst decision you've made in the last 2 years? The best decision you've made in the last 2 years? And
well, that comes later in this interview.
Let's not go there.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. And then then it's like, okay, so you did an undergraduate project. I said, yes, tell us about that, and just be able to talk them through it. And they just show genuine interest, as opposed to put up a PowerPoint presentation, transition your slides, and show, no, talk me through it and make me able to understand it when you actually explain it to me, as opposed to that. I think that, for me personally, is a greater way to conduct an interview.
Yeah, so I do totally agree, but I think then it also very much depends on the interviewer and not the interviewee. So do you think then, as an interviewee, you should try and steer the conversation into a more friendly way, or do you just go with what the interviewer, like how they've set the tone? Do you just roll with it?
My response is, be yourself. How are you naturally in terms of your persona, your disposition? Are you a talky person and you just want to talk to people? Talk. Because sooner or later, if they do recruit you, they're going to discover that about you. So if they don't like that about you from the outset, you have to also ask yourself a question. You have to say to yourself, rather, I'm interviewing them as well. Are these people that I can see me spending the next 4 years of my life with?
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's an important question to have in the back of your mind.
So if you're interviewing, it's about to set the tone for the whole relationship. So you really, really need to sort of if you're someone who is, I don't know, you're a challenging type of person, shall we say, a disruptor, then, you shouldn't necessarily be compliant in the interview just to get it. You should say, look, I want to do this, I want to do that, I might deviate. You need to sort of put your case forward, because if anything, an interviewer would respect it. But you've got to remember that some interviewers then might not like it. So being yourself is, yourself 50%.
You're right, and one can look at that as a disadvantage. I do not take that view per se, because you have to think, okay, in me being this, in me thinking about the project and thinking about potential directions that it could go into, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the wrong person. It means actually I am showing all the promises of being a good scientist. And you who are already further on in your career, here you are, you have the opportunity to really help to shape and mold, and rather than see it as a bad thing per se. And if that can't be conveyed from the recruiter side or the supervisory side, then you also have to ask yourself, is that the team you want to be in? Because one thing I do know about undertaking a PhD is that, because I've seen others gone through this, I personally haven't, but I've seen others who have gone through it. If somehow you're in the middle of your PhD and you find that your supervisor is rigid, there is absolutely no room to flourish. There's absolutely no room for your input, your ideas. You're going through this routine thing, and what they say you have to do, you're not allowed to think about it. And that's going to frustrate you. And a lot of people have quit their PhDs because of that particular issue. A lot of people have come out of this, started as a postdoc in various labs, not able to think about the problem and solve the problem on their own, because that wasn't encouraged within training. And so effectively what they end up is acting as if they're technical staff who are told what to do repeatedly, as opposed to being able to go off and explore it and think about it for themselves. And so I think you perhaps may want to take a pragmatic view and say, you know what, if you are like this now in the interview process, what is our relationship going to be like 2 years into a PhD, and whether or not you'll be able to stay in that environment comfortably.
Yeah, definitely. So it seems though in your interview for your PhD that you really like this, the way that you were interviewed, so much. It
lasted 4 hours, mate. 4 hours. It was just good chats. Just great chats. Yeah, it was a good chat. It was a great chat. Yeah.
So you took this PhD in virology, and yeah, tell me a little. Maybe not too technical, but just tell me a little bit about your PhD.
So my PhD was basically looking at this thing we call polarity or polarization. The liver being this complex organ, beautiful organ, my favorite organ, if we can have such a thing. Yeah, the geek is coming out now. And it's got it's got this thing called cellular polarity, which is, you find this in other cells as well. But polarization in the liver is different, which means you've got this apical domain, you've got a basolateral domain of the cell, and the function of things at the apical and basolateral domains are completely different, in that we have these tight junction proteins at the top, which is the apical surface of the cells, and basically they are good gatekeepers. They stop things coming in and out. And the basolateral membrane, then you don't find as many tight junctions, and these basolateral membranes are exposed to what we call the sinusoids of the liver, which are sort of these capillary spaces where blood flow occurs rather, and you'd have the blood flowing into the liver. And it comes in from what we call zone 1 of the liver, which is highly oxygenated, and it flows all the way through the third zone of the liver, zone 3, which is low oxygenated. So we're going from a normoxic region to a very hypoxic region. And so what we found is that when the virus, use hepatitis C for example, comes into the liver, it really doesn't like the normoxic areas of the liver or the highly oxygenated areas of the liver. It prefers areas of hypoxia because that helps its replication. That also helps it to form a tumor and to completely change the landscape of the liver altogether. And it does slowly over time tends to modify the liver microenvironment to change its energetics, its bioenergetics, change its physiological processes to make it into that comfortable environment. However, individuals normally end up with liver failure, which means that can't be sustained for long, either through fibrosis or cancer development. So it's really now was trying to uncover the process whereby the virus is able to go and reprogram the liver, destroy all those tight junction gatekeepers, and to make the liver into an environment that it would actually thrive and survive in. And also then the onset of a cancer, or the development of that cancer, how that comes about, what are some of the driving factors, and the ideal situation or scenario there would be to identify promising therapeutic targets.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like awesome. Did you identify any of these therapeutic targets?
It's great. We uncovered an entire hypoxia signaling pathway, which was incredible. Topical recently, you would have heard them said that the steroid Dexamethasone is used to treat those with chronic COVID-19. One of the pathway I identified in my PhD research as well was the glucocorticoid signaling pathway, which is basically dexamethasone is a glucocorticoid, and when you give that to a person, it gets into their cell, activate this particular signaling pathway, which normally is cytoplasmic based, translocates to the nucleus, and basically triggers a whole array of anti-inflammatory genes. So you get a dampening of the immune response. So that's another thing we uncovered, in that hepatitis C is able to silently or stealthily moved within somebody's body, evade the immune system. What we find is because it can switch off interferon signaling, it can switch off pro-inflammatory signaling, and just switch on these anti-inflammatory pathway. So basically your body just becomes a reservoir, the ideal reservoir for the virus to thrive and survive as it triggers these pathways. And what we found is that if you can basically stop the translocation of the glucocorticoid receptor to the nucleus, you stop those genes being transactivated or being activated, and therefore, you can effectively starve that virus out, and the immune system can come in and have a role there. So these were some exciting stuff. Did pretty well out of that. I think I was doing very well. I think by the time I finished my PhD, I had over 10 publications.
Wow. That's so. I mean, just as a normal benchmark, I'm a PhD student, and my first author paper is in preparation, but currently I have 0. So this is incredible. It's incredibly impressive. I have a few a few that I've done bits on, but yeah, how many of those 10 were first author?
So 4.
4. So yeah, very 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 impressive work. And then, I just had a very quick question in terms of the COVID-19 stuff you mentioned. So I know dexamethasone is also a barrier enhancing compound. Does it enhance the barrier? So you mentioned the gatekeepers of these tight junctions in the liver epithelial cells. So is it acting there as well as on the glucocorticoids?
And this is interesting. It's a very good question you've asked there. And this is very, very interesting in that the way the virus primes the signaling pathway, the glucocorticoid signaling pathway to work, seems to be different to the way that a steroid hormone would actually prime it to signal. So we didn't quite get to the nuance as to what was going on there with the virus signaling, but there was certainly a difference in terms of the gene profile that you see become activated when it's triggered by the virus versus when it's triggered by a steroid hormone. So if you put dexamethasone in the system, for example, it would promote those tight junctions. So for example, one of those tight junction proteins is called occludin, and we would see the expression of that pretty much going off the charts. It goes up with treatments with dexamethasone. Occludin is interesting in actually it also acts as a receptor to which the virus would bind in order to gain entry into the cell. So that's also a very interesting thing to know. But certainly when we treat with occludin, we'd actually see polarity increase, and there is sort of like a reduction in the virus being able to sort of infect the cell. Yet, once the virus infects the cell, it can pretty much do something with the glucocorticoid receptor, which a steroid signal or steroid antagonist wouldn't be able to do, agonist rather wouldn't be able to do.
Wow. So we know from our previous conversations earlier in this podcast that you're currently a Convergence Sciences training manager, but then when you'd done your PhD, you didn't go straight into this role that you're in at present. So when you come to the end of your PhD, what was the thinking behind what you were going to do next, and what did you do next?
I mean, my PhD, as much as it had virology in there, I think the biggest thing that I took out of it, for me anyway, and the part that I gravitated towards the most was the cellular biology component. I was very intrigued about how cell works, how inflammatory pathways works, delineating those processes and actually responding to events such as diseases. That for me was very interesting. And that's really the direction I was going into. Long story short, I ended up taking on a postdoctoral position at Imperial College London. And you think, wow, I'm going to the big city, this is London. And not only that, wow, it's Imperial, global top 10 university, and you're just thinking, whoa, and for a black man as well, this is exciting. Like an entire community were applauding me, put me up as this poster boy. There was nothing I could have done wrong in that moment. It was just like, for me, for them rather, my achievement was their achievement also. It was a collective achievement, and therefore, we're going to wish him goodwill. We're going to put on a celebration for him, and then we're going to send him off, and he's going to be there, and he's going to do us so proud. And every now and again, we're going to post something on social media about him, just to remind the world that we're still proud of him. And it was good times. It was nice. It was really, really nice. And that's where we met. You met at Imperial because I was.
We did.
Yeah, I was working.
Garrick was my master's supervisor. It was 6 years ago, I think now.
Yeah, and this young guy came in, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, excited. He just wants to do science. It was good. It was good.
Yeah, he quickly knocked that out. I mean.
Yeah, it's quickly. And then he had a worldview which was interesting. I was like, okay, London has a lot to teach you.
It does, and it has taught me an awful lot since. Sorry, go on.
No, I came to Imperial and I was excited to do some, as I said, I'm interested in the biology of the cell, and I was doing some work, especially around the vasculature and endothelial dysfunction. And that spoke to me because having worked with liver before, endothelial cells are a big part of the liver, especially these cells called the sinusoidal endothelial cells, which does so many amazing things in terms of their barrier function, in terms of how they regulate immune cell trafficking and all these wonderful things in terms of their contribution, paracrine signals that they pass on to actually impact the rest of the organ, the liver organ that is. I was like, this is exciting, like there's stuff we can do around endothelial dysfunction, and especially when it comes to disease. And I was actually excited about doing that project. I think when I had my interview at Imperial, I think it was very clear from the outset that I was ambitious. I wanted to go off and I wanted to do a fellowship. I have ideas about the project. I'm not a, this is how we do it and that's it. That was very, very clear. And I think having left that interview, what I discovered later was that from existing members of the lab at that time was that they were saying that when you completed the interview, the panel's general feeling was, he's brilliant, but we're worried that he's so progressive that he may leave us. And I'm not quite sure what to think about that still.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to say about that, to be honest. Yeah.
But anyway, did end up getting the position, and I was there, and as we said, that's where we met, and we had an entire project around. I think the big word was cytoprotection.
It was for my project, yeah. It's still a very big word in those vascular circles, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really about protecting the cells so that they can do their job normally, and then you don't have endothelial dysfunction. And I was there, and I was drawing in on aspects of my PhD, and there was the whole hypoxia signaling, which was part of my PhD.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring some of that in. And there wasn't a sort of reticence against bringing all that. I think over time my ideas were accepted and they were seen as good ideas, like, okay, it's going to drive this project onwards. And I was thinking about all these ideas. I wanted to bring mitochondrial dysfunction and things like that into the equation as well, because it fit well. That's basically what it was. I think eventually enthusiasm started to dry up.
From your side?
From my side, in the sense of, I didn't lack ideas. My mind was sparking off with ideas and thoughts as to how I could progress a project. My mind was sparking off with ideas for fellowships and career development awards and things like that. I think for me, it just looked like after a particular piece of time that those ideas were supported because they were seen as a way to sort of like promote the research of that lab and take their research to another level, as opposed to this is Garrick and this is what Garrick needs to do now to get on to the next stage of his career. So that's something that became obvious to me. Also, I think in doing these things, one of the things that you're normally encouraged to do, especially when you're trying to gain independence as an early career researcher, is to try and go somewhere which is not your current lab. Just go out there, get experience somewhere else, attach yourself to somewhere else. And in looking for sponsors for grant writing and things like that, I'd found sponsors. I don't think there was that support where I was to sort of like release me with these ideas, etc. And so that just became problematic. In that you will be supported providing you stay where you are and do your fellowship here. So there was that aspect to it. And
so do you think is this a wider thing within academia, or is this just an isolated incident?
I'd like to think that it is isolated, but I think in conversations I've had subsequently, it's interesting. I see the emergence of individuals who are having similar experience, that it's very hard to sort of gain independence. Independence is the best you get in some settings is that you stay in the same group. Therefore, what your discoveries are also reflects well on that group. And I see other individuals coming through thinking like that. And I do think that's one of the grave pitfalls about developing scientists or making scientists, is that when you hold on to them so much, because you're looking at things from your perspective as the head of a lab, the head of a group, or whatever it may be, to sort of like think about your research career as opposed to their research career. And I think what didn't help at the time was it was an environment where you saw other talented postdoctoral fellows who basically just quit or ended up at a dead end at the end of their postdoctoral tenure. And it just didn't give that sort of boost or confidence that this is actually going to turn out well if you were to actually then just buckle down and say, you know what, I'll do it here. I've got a great chance of getting funding for a fellowship, but I'll just continue to do it here. It just didn't seem to end up well for others who have taken on that approach.
So at Birmingham, did you figure the same, or was it different?
Birmingham was a completely different ballgame. Birmingham would be encouraging to say, okay, no, you need to go off, get yourself a position at the Pasteur Institute, write for a position in America to Rockefeller, and they would help you to actually find some of these sponsors, and they would push you internationally as well, to find some of these sponsors internationally, work with them to develop a project, and then go off. Enjoy your scientific journey, your scientific building, your scientific discovery. That, for me, is one of the great things about Birmingham. I think oftentimes, and I will say this as advice to anyone who's undertaking this scientific journey as well, oftentimes we become very focused on the clouds of an institution over and above the actual training protocols and infrastructure within said institution. And it is not to say that institutions that have got very good clout doesn't necessarily have good sort of training ethos. I think sometimes you go to an institution that may be ranked at number 30 in the world versus instead of going to the number 2 ranked, and what you find is the number 30 institution, they have a much more, it's not written on paper, it's almost a philosophy as to how you develop the next generation of scientists.
So I agree, but I'd also like to just slip in a football analogy there, because it's the way I see this and the way I've often thought about it is that it's more of if you want to play for the top Premier League team at the moment. Obviously it's changing. Currently it's Man City sitting pretty at the top of the Premier League. Do you want to sit on the subs bench there for 90 minutes every week, or do you want to go drop down a league or drop down to another team where you can get more playing time, you can gain more experience, and therefore you're going to get the confidence as well, because that's a huge thing. You're going to get the confidence to be able to go through and perform at a really high level, and then go and play for the Man Cities, the Liverpools, all of these teams. So I do feel there is that element. So I think in a factor that anybody should take into consideration when choosing an institution, a PhD, whatever it may be, your next step is not necessarily, oh yes, I've made it to Imperial, I've made it to an Oxford, I've made it to a Cambridge. It's like, how are you going to develop me? What are you going to do for me?
Absolutely.
I'm going to come in, I'm going to work my butt off, and then what are you going to, how are you going to reward me back? So I think that's really interesting. But another question that I wanted to ask you while I was listening to your experiences was that we perhaps see through different eyes in terms of Imperial. Like, you look for things that I would potentially not. Again, with you being a black guy. So what would maybe if you could just comment on, you mentioned before when you went to Nottingham, you were the black person around. What were your experiences with Imperial?
Imperial is not diverse as Imperial should be in a multicultural city. London is just this, it's a beautiful environment of different people, etc. But then you step onto Imperial space, and then that suddenly just changes. It's as if you've walked into a completely different world. That is not to say that there aren't other people from ethnic minority backgrounds in Imperial. There are, but certainly it is the minority. I think it comes as no surprise to say that Imperial. I just for me, if you speak to a black community in London and you ask them to name universities in London, they will mention UCL, they will mention King's, they'll mention Goldsmiths and others. Imperial will not be a mention. And is the truth is...
Why is that? Yeah.
I don't think Imperial has done enough in terms of making itself known to a wider cross-section of Londoners, for example. And for those who do know of Imperial, they will then say things like, oh, that's the white man's university. We're not welcome there. And so there seems to be this barrier. And it's not always correct, their impression or interpretation of it, but nonetheless, there seems to be this barrier, this wall as to what goes on over there. What they do know,
so is it more the perception rather than the what? Because I don't know what.
So there is the perception, but then there's the perception, but then you have to ask yourself, like, where did that perception come from? Mm-hmm. And if that perception,
I don't think the name helps in that respect.
The name doesn't help. The name doesn't help, especially when I think there was they had a motto in Latin, and it was translated as the jewel in the crown or something like that, which was changed recently after there was protest around Black Lives Matters. So that was
that's progressive. Yeah.
That's a recent change, but I think it's interesting for us to be in the 21st century and something like that was still there. As something positive. It says a lot. And there's that perception, and rightly or wrongly, that perception came from somewhere, and that perception is still in place, and that tells me something, that perhaps work needs to be done in terms of reaching out to other communities. And I actually see Imperial taking steps in this area with the opening of the new White City campus and all that, the hack space and sort of community spaces there. I do see that taking place, where schools in the surrounding areas and people as well are sort of invited in to actually come and see what's happening. One thing I always say to people as well from my community is that university spaces are public spaces, which means that you are actually allowed to come in, you are actually allowed to sort of engage and interact, but I think it's one thing people wanting to do that, it's another thing for that invitation to be issued and to be sent out. And so I found myself in a world where there are those who know that it's certainly, in terms of looking at Imperial and where it's ranked in the world and what it is known for, it's certainly seen as a prestigious place. And you're there, and again, you will have segments of the Black community who will cheer me on and say, well done. My ethos now is to say, okay, let's get more people who look like me to aspire to attend Imperial College. Let's get more people who look like me to aspire to get trained to become a scientist. Let's get and what better place to do that than a college that actually or a university rather that actually specializes in the STEM subjects. What better place to do that? It's a great academic environment, and I do think that in coming into a place like Imperial, one thing I will say is that you are exposed to great minds, great thinkers, and if they see that you're serious and you're here to learn, you're here to work, you are very much welcome into that space. And people will interact with you well, people will get on with you well, and you can make some great friends and some great colleagues. And that certainly has been my experience at Imperial.
Yeah, definitely. I agree as well. But again, like I say, we potentially see it just a little bit differently. So thank you very much again for your perspective on that. And I know that your work as the Convergence Science Training Manager is helping to shape this community outreach as well. So the final thing, this section's been brilliant, but I'd just like to wrap it up by asking what your advice would be to a young person right now. And there's three parts to this. So firstly, what would your advice be to a young person who's about to enter an undergraduate degree, a postgraduate degree, or a post-PhD position? And is it the same for all three?
No, it's not the same. I think if you do intend on entering into an undergraduate degree, I think topical right now. We're in a COVID situation. Science degrees, by nature of how they're set up, means that you will need a lot of practical experience or lab experience. Depending on where you're going, begin to consider actually how much practical training would you get. I know some universities are currently setting up things whereby technicians or teachers can set up video links so they can actually have students at home or wherever they are watching them online doing a practical. But watching somebody undertaking a practical and actually physically doing it yourself is a completely different thing. And I think that practical training is such a key part, a fundamental part of becoming or developing as a scientist. And so you have to now, going into an undergraduate situation, ask yourself, will my undergraduate training really equip me in the way that I need for me to really get enthusiastic and excited about science and what it will potentially involve if I was to choose to continue in this pathway. So I think that's something that you should consider taking into account the current situation.
Okay.
The other thing to consider is I wouldn't dissuade anyone from doing a science degree, even if at the end you do not want to continue in science. And the reason why I said that is the skills that you are taught on a science degree are so transferable. And the important thing is to have a qualification, that baseline qualification, upon which you can then subsequently go on and build. And I think just science and the nature of how it is and how it works will give you some incredibly good analytical skills. It will challenge and sharpen your communication skills. It will challenge and sharpen your ability to troubleshoot and so on and so forth. These are great skills that you can take and apply elsewhere. So with that in mind as well, I would encourage anyone to do a science degree. And going off and thinking about a postgraduate degree, the question I would put before you is, and a lot of people don't have this in mind before, and you know, I'm not saying anyone is materialistic, but this needs to be real. You may watch TV show and you see scientists doing great things, and you think, oh, that's so cool. Or you see a news report like, oh, that's so cool, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're thinking, ding, 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 money. And the truth is you go off and you spend some time doing some postgraduate study. And in the end, the pay is terrible. So you become incredibly qualified and poorly paid. So that's...
And also this name and lights thing with all of these publications. I mean, obviously, yeah, you did an incredible job getting yours. I'm still working on earning my stripes, but you know, it takes time. It's not there's certainly no instant gratification in science. It takes time, it takes resilience, it takes patience. It might never work what you're trying to do, and then you might never get this publication. So, you know, this is something that is very
Yeah, so think about these practical elements, but at the same time, if you genuinely have a love for it, then somehow I believe you'll be able to sort of navigate your way through, irrespective of the pay and so on and so forth. I just want you to be practical and in terms of making these decisions. Don't think that you're going off to a high-flying career where next month you're going to be a Nobel Prize scientist. It doesn't work like that. It's a bit more tougher and mature, trickier than that. And so oftentimes when undergraduate tutors are saying, you're doing well at science, you should go off and do a PhD, etc., what they don't tell you is how that works in principle, how that works after graduating with a PhD, what you're going to go on to, what your salary will be, how it actually works day in, day out, trying to undertake a PhD studentship. And I think it's good to get all those facts before you apply and press that application button. Get a holistic view such that when you do go that route, at least you're going into it with your eyes wide open. One thing I was asked during my PhD interview was, what makes you want to do this? And my response was that prior to that, I'd spent a year in Public Health England, working in the WHO laboratory for influenza or respiratory viruses. And I saw the PhD students there at that time and what they did and their sort of frustrations and their day in and their day out. And that gave me a really good grasp as to what this might involve. And that was my answer to the interview panel, in that I've seen this in action and it hasn't put me off. I actually think it's exciting and something that is worthwhile pursuing. So again, understand fully and factually what it is that you're signing up for. In terms of going further after postgraduate studies, I would say think about the trajectory for a scientist, especially if you're going to remain in academia. In an academic setting, at most you'll get 2 postdoctoral positions. These are fixed term contracts, probably up to 5 years if you're lucky. But at the end of it, you're pretty much back to square one, in that if you're writing for grants or career development awards, it's not everybody's going to be successful at this. And if you're not successful, what is your backup plan? And you have to now begin to think, you've spent a lot of years training towards this, a lot of years working in this, and then suddenly you're not successful. What is now left for you to do? And even if you are successful, then it's going to get to another place further on in your career where you have to write for more grants. So it's a lifetime of writing for grants after grants after grants. So just consider that. Are you somebody who enjoy the writing process, or do you just want to be in the lab, blue sky thinking, you just want to be there doing some practical work, or do you actually like that administrative side of it as well? So these are some of the things to consider. And if your answer to all of them is yes, then go on and become a great scientist. And we look forward to seeing you on my TV screen soon, because you would have done something fantastic. And I genuinely know that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. Yeah, and again, thank you very much for your for everything in this section. Really appreciate it. Our next section is called Your Experiences in Science. So we've already talked about some of your experiences, but I just wanted to put another few questions to you about how you felt at certain points in your career, and what other particular experiences have been. But yeah, let's just start off by very quickly discussing what your transition from postdoc to Convergent Science training manager was like.
Yeah. And I think it actually stems back to something that I did during my PhD years, and that I was always fascinated by training and how individuals are trained to become a scientist. And when I was doing my PhD, there was this sort of like, I don't know, it's just this gloomy mood that just came over the Birmingham PhD cohort. They just was talking about, okay, what's coming after this? Because people would genuinely get included then and start thinking about jobs and prospects after PhD. And they were like, wow, it looks terrible out there. And so there was this sort of doom and gloom thing. And for me, I was, okay, what can I do about this? And I thought to myself, okay, let me think about this. And I thought, okay, let me get those who have been there. They've gone on the journey, they've been successful on the journey. And not only that, they're now in a position where they can influence policy as to how science careers actually work and how they turn out. And so, okay, the best person to go for here is Sir Paul Nurse, who at that time was the president of the Royal Society. He was a good policymaker and funding body around, science and scientific research. And he had won a Nobel Prize as well for his work. And I thought, okay, great, this brother has done it. I call him, you can tell the black is coming out in me now. He has done it. So let me invite him to actually come and boost morale, boost the prospects, have a word with these students and just have a conversation with them. And I sent him a message, and I basically, and this is something great for you to think about as well. Use everything about you. Don't try and sound like, oh, I'm professional and I'm this and that on an email, especially when you're trying to attract the attention of big people who have done well. You don't be authentic, be yourself. Late on the line, I am in my second year of doing my PhD. This is what I think. I am challenging you as somebody who has done this, quite inspiring at the same time. But hey, also, don't you think it's a great chance to come and hang out with some young people? How great would that be? Yeah. So try and just make it be relatable, be approachable. Don't really feel like you need to take a formalized approach. And that's the kind of email that I sent to Sir Paul's office. And his PA at the time responded and said, okay, when do you need him? How long do you need him for? What do you need him for? And I just laid it out completely. And he said, okay, we'll come and spend the entire day with you.
Wow.
Yeah. And that turned into an interesting thing, because at that point, the vice chancellor at the uni, he had this series of lectures that he did. He called them the VC's distinguished lectures. And he used to get some really top people to come along and give a lecture to the university. And when he heard that I'd got Paul, I was like, how did you manage that?
Yeah, exactly. Did he try and take ownership, this guy then?
And there was an element of that. But anyway, let's just move along. He came and certainly I set up this wonderful lecture where he was able to speak to the entire faculty of medicine and whoever else wanted to come along and listen to him. And that seminar I introduced, I chaired the Q&A session. I was this rookie PhD student, conspicuously black, standing in front of this majority white audience and say, by the way, I'd like you to welcome Sir Paul Nurse. And we the Sir was dropped at that time because we had conversations prior. So it's just Paul and Garrick having a chat now. So it was just like, Paul, what do you think, Garrick? Yeah. And then what was interesting that as part of that visit as well, when he came along, he decided to have a conversation with the Dean of Medicine and the Pro Vice Chancellor of Research. And these are big tiered conversation between people who knows what they're talking about, me, rookie student. Yeah. And he said, you know what, Garrick is the one who invited me here. I'm not going to have any conversation where he's not present. So I'm not going to go off this to silo meetings with the big boys and then he's excluded.
Oh, well, that's really, really good on Paul Nurse's
absolutely.
So Sir Paul, if you're listening to this, I'm sure he is, of course, but Sir Paul, you know, we commend you. That was, really good for you. More people should be like that. Definitely.
I agree. And I really loved that approach. And I was able to sit in on this particular meeting. I was like, I was sitting there all proud. I was like, yeah, I'm here with the big boy. Let me just sip my tea as they poured the tea and, you know, the expensive china and everything. So
fancy china they brought out. The
exactly.
Fancy china, the best tea, the best
only
soap,
the best, you know. Only the best for Paul. Only the best for Paul. And so that was part of the experience. And then I took him around, and those people who were PhD students as well, who they were friends with me. I wanted them to be able to personally meet him, personally shake his hand, have some interaction. I took him to the office where I used to sit. Introduced him to my colleagues from my lab as well, and then we went off, and then we had this thing based on question time, which is something you see on the TV with these politicians. Mm-hmm. I had a question time, but it was question time with Sir Paul, and we had early career researchers, PhD students all came out and basically gave a short presentation about how he got the Nobel Prize, what he was publishing on. And one of the key things he said in that was, because you look at his publication history and realize, no, this brother was publishing a lot in Nature. In the early parts of his career. But what was interesting about the publications was that if you look at the authorship setup, normally when you have a publication, the senior author or the principal investigator, you can tell where they're positioned, you can tell which lab this is coming from, and usually those are the individuals, who get any sort of recognition for the publication. Not necessarily the postdoc who did all the work, or the PhD student who did all the work, or the technical staff who did all the work. It is coming from this person's lab. Therefore, if there's any merit or credit for this, it should go to that person. And I'm looking at these things like Sir Paul had his names on paper either by himself or at that sort of senior author position very early on in his career. And one of the things he said about that was that he was allowed to do that.
Oh, really? So when you say early on in his career, what position was he at here? Was he a postdoc?
He was a postdoc, yeah.
Postdoc, right. Oh, wow.
He was allowed to do that, which is something that you can see that it's not something you would readily find anymore. And therefore...
I don't think I've ever heard of that, ever.
Neither have I. And therefore, what he was really trying to do was to give some perspective in saying that it's nice that he won the Nobel Prize, but he also was very pragmatic in saying that if it was later on, or if he was in the situation that the students were in then, he don't think that he would have gone on and won a Nobel Prize. Because the training landscape has changed so much. And what he was trying to do was give this perspective that the training landscape is just so different now, which makes it much harder for discoveries to be made and for a Nobel Prize to be won. But he gave some great insights there, and I think that feeds back into Convergence now and why I love Convergence. And it was the idea that he, at that point, was just about to transition on to become the chief executive of the Francis Crick Institute. And he was thinking about training PhD students within that space. And one of the things he said is you can't just teach them science. You can't just equip them with skills in science. These students must be able to go onto transferable skills courses, whether it be learning media skills, whether it be learning business skills and other types of skills, such that they will leave much more all-rounded and be able to sort of like go into different areas if the science journey doesn't work out for them. And it's an ethos. Yeah. It's a training ethos which really spoke to me. And the fact that I set that up and got an influential leader within the scientific community to come along and really speak to these students who were feeling down about their prospects in life, and then he just came and he just raised their expectations while actually giving them some real insights. It was something that was dear to my heart from the very get-go, clearly. And
that's very, very inspiring.
Having gone through the postdoctoral experience as well, I begin to think about, also based on my own experience, how do I want to see people trained? And in thinking about that, I'm thinking, okay, what would be the perfect role actually that would allow me to have considerable influence here, and also live out some of these things as to how scientists, how do we make a scientist? And then this pops up out of nowhere. It's almost like, I don't know, the stars aligned in my favor. And the role I'm in now just pops up out of nowhere. And at that point, it was a baseline. We had this idea. Okay, Garrick, your role is to build it. Your role is to have oversight of it. Your role is to put something in place that is truly unique. Although done within the setting of cancer, I think a lot of things that we're doing here can be taken and apply much more widely. As a result, it's really now training the next generation of what we call convergence scientists, who will be able to accelerate new methodologies, new technologies into a clinical setting that will benefit cancer patients. Nothing we do shouldn't have clinical utilization to it. It should do. For me, training involves bringing back the philosophy into PhD, because that PhD, I think the philosophy, the P part, is missing from a lot of training. And so our students, you're not just thinking about different disciplines, you're gaining, as part of the training program as well, we have this thing called the Convergence Science training course. On that, you are trained how to develop a business plan. You are trained how to stand before a den of dragons and pitch that business plan. If that works out well, you are trained how to spin that out into a company. You are trained how the process of getting devices and new medicines into the NHS, and what are the bottlenecks that you should be aware of. You are trained around the whole setting of publications. What is the ethos that journals take on? And this involves getting journal editors to come in and talk about their ethos of taking on papers. And so the students in that setting can basically critique, ask questions, challenge, etc. You're trained how to communicate much more effectively through debates, arguing a point. One of the things we're developing now is a debate around implantable versus imaging devices for monitoring cancer therapy, because you don't just want to throw therapy at a patient and say, oh, did it work or didn't it work? You want to be able to see in real time, what is that therapy doing? Is it at the right dosage? Is it actually affecting the cancer, or do we have to wait further down the line to actually see what it's done? You don't want to take a static image to say we scanned today after 5 weeks of chemotherapy to see what. No, you want that ongoing information over time.
It's moved on by the time you get to look at it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's being aware of the entire landscape and begin to just draw from different sources and have a credible debate about where we should be going, what the challenges are, and how they themselves could be the key protagonist in doing something about it. And they will leave not just with a PhD, they will leave with a sense of, I've had cutting-edge training across several disciplines. I'm very sort of on top of my game when it comes to those disciplines. I've had cutting-edge training from 2 world-leading institutions. I've had training that crossed over into the space of philosophy, the thinking, training that actually helps me to understand how policy works and how we develop policy when it comes to publications and things like that. And part of this is not just talking to journal editors, it's about influencing those editors, how to actually begin to think how to review convergent science publications now, because that's something that will eventually need to happen. And you can't take the same approach that you normally do, because if you get a convergent science paper published, you can't look at it, you can't get a biologist looking at it and just judging it purely on the biology. You need to have somebody who is skilled in physics to actually say, actually, all of this ties up and makes sense as well. So how do we do that? And they leave as well, as I said, with these business skills, and they just leave as top communicators as well. We expose them to patients at every step of the journey. in that if you're researching cancer, you shouldn't just do it in the lab. You need to meet those people who are affected by cancer and be able to communicate your research to them, and not only tell them about it, but get them involved in your entire PhD journey. We find that it's very inspiring for our students in that it keeps them focused and reminds them why they're doing what they're doing and the importance of doing it.
Yeah, definitely, because a lot of the time PhDs, like, you're working on a specific disease, but I don't know about you and your PhD, but did you come into into contact with many liver cancer patients?
The most I came into contact with a liver cancer patient was going to a theatre to watch an operation be performed on a patient.
Well, I mean, that's still pretty cool. Like, that's it must still feel connected. Whereas, I think most people can attest to not ever really having much contact with any patient. So yeah, that's I mean, if that's not the best advert for a PhD I've ever heard, then I don't know what is. I've got a PhD
sign
program.
up to our PhD program. It's great.
And I was also going to ask you about what your most memorable experience in science was, but we'll tick that box now and we'll move straight on. So we have already spoken a little bit about the challenges you faced as a student. So I think I'll just skip ahead and ask what the best piece of advice somebody ever gave you was.
The best piece of wow, that's a tough one. A lot of people have advised me.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's like. It could just be like something that you were. I mean, I don't know. Somebody told you one time. They don't even have to be in a position of power. It could be a family member. It could be anything. But what's something that you really live by and has really helped you?
I think something that I really live by, which has really helped me, is the idea of. And it's something my grandmother used to say to me, is that oftentimes we don't get on and do things in life, or we fail in life because we are too busy considering all the other factors and everything else that everyone has to say. Ultimately, you must distill it down to, what do you think? And really, that's the advice. What do you think? It was a question. What do you think? And that triggered so many thoughts. And it's really important to hear your own voice, to have that perspective, and when you have that trail of thought, then it gives you a sort of steer as to where you need to go next, what you need to do next. Sort of a directive, your internal compass. That's your sat nav right there. And so my advice to anyone is the question: what do you think? And I think with being trained as a scientist, especially, that becomes very important. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I'll certainly have a think. What's been the highlight of your career?
The highlight of my career has been it's not even in the publications or sort of like some of the discoveries that I made earlier on, or even launching a sort of like Convergence Science program. I think the highlight of it is just to see along the journey being able to impact people. So for example, you're one of my highlights. Just being able, no, it's I'm being serious here. Just being able to sort of like supervise your master's project, and just the individual who came in and the individual you are right now. I think the growth has just been incredible, and just to see where you're off to now and how you're getting on, and here we are having a conversation. I just feel like I'm the apprentice now. This is your show, mate. This is your show.
Well, thanks, man. That's definitely. And I know you mentor a lot of people as well, and your mentorship is. I mean, I want to talk to you a bit later about that, but definitely, the bringing other people up is and helping other people build. That's a huge factor. So, and I have to give a lot of credit to my critical thinking skills to you, because there's a lot of people along the way who help you develop in certain areas, and you've certainly helped me think about it a lot more. But
that was painful. I used to say, what do you think, Alex?
Well, this is the thing, because then I go into meta thinking and I think, oh my god, what do I think? I'm now thinking about thinking, and then I'm thinking what I'm thinking about thinking, and then I'm like, oh my god, this is so it was painful, and it's a skill and you have to develop it. It's something I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at now, but it took me a while. It certainly took me a while. The next question then, the hardest decision of your career.
I suppose the hardest decision actually was, in the end, I decided not to go for the fellowship, and that was for the aforementioned reasons. I decided, no, this is not working, and that wasn't the sole reason for it. I think other reasons that came into play as well were some of those that I mentioned as well, which is about the idea of how long do I want to spend my life writing for? Applying and reapplying and so on and so forth. And also, I need to be somewhere where I feel like I'm genuinely making a contribution, as opposed to the frustration of, okay, I need to write a paper, I need to get this paper published, and so on and so forth. And I thought, is this the best way forward for me? And it was something that I grappled with, it's something that I wrestled with. In the end, as I said, the stars were aligned and something like this came up because it was something that I was still thinking about. But even after starting this, there were days when I would think and I'd find myself just wondering, did I make the right decision? And am I going to miss this and wake up one day and think, what a terrible mistake? And did there times where I was like, oh, do I miss the lab? But gradually over time, although that was hard, it's going back to that voice. What do you really think, Garrick? Asking that question.
I suppose you still have roots back though as well.
No.
You know, you're still very, very much involved in the whole sphere, and you've got experience doing something else for. How long have you been in this role now?
I've been in this role 2 years,
Yeah. So I mean, you haven't shut any doors or anything. So
I don't want to go back. Let's put it like that. I think with the passing of time, I've realized, I'm exactly where I need to be.
Good.
Because it's almost the best of both worlds. Because a lot of what I do as well, in terms of the training, it means that I get to have a wider perspective of science and research that is taking place across both institutions, interacting and dealing with those research groups, learning about their cool experiments, setting up cool ideas with them about how to train our students. So, for example, we could set up a training around, okay, how would you address this problem from the perspective of an engineer? I can go and sit with the engineer and come up with a cool protocol and an experiment as well that then we throw at biologists to do, although it was designed by an engineer. So things like that. So it pretty much keeps me within the research landscape as well. And also I do maintain honorary contracts with labs, so I can from time to time pop in and just see what's happening, and just get put some input in there, attend lab meetings or whatever else. So I'm very much still there.
Yeah, for sure.
Just not with the stress of it.
Have you ever suffered from imposter syndrome?
We're all imposters in some way, aren't we?
Yeah. So, well, this is it. So, a lot of people, particularly in science, they really feel like they shouldn't be doing this. Like, they're not qualified. They don't. I don't deserve to be here. This, that, and the other for whatever reason. Mostly, yeah. But is it ever?
I do that daily in my current job. I could sit in a room and there are some very important people there, policymakers around governance and all these things, and they're talking a language that I have absolutely no clue about. And I'll sit there and I'll nod my head like,
Yeah.
And if you're asked a question to stall, you always say, that's really interesting, just to sort of stall time whilst you mull over things in your head to try and give an answer. But I'm in settings like that and I just feel like an absolute imposter. And even when I initially started this role, it's so completely different to what I normally do. And then there's this pressure that you need to come up to scratch very quickly. You need to learn very quickly. But in the meantime, you just have to fake it till you make it. That's how I feel. often.
No, I totally agree. You get the experience as you come. It's one of those, like, when it comes to learning a new language, you're only able to fluently speak it when you've been there for a while. You will get there, and I've seen that you're pretty convincing with this whole fake it till you make it thing. So
I'm being an imposter here right now. I'm being an imposter here. I think what I will say to those as or maybe listening as well is this idea of it's okay. You're not going to know everything, and I think daily what you should do is take on the approach that you're a student, and you're always learning, and it doesn't matter if you don't know all the answers. There is never such a thing as a stupid question. There's always a stupid answer though. So ask as many questions as you want. It is incumbent on those who are answering the questions to give you a non-stupid answer, but your question is never stupid. So don't be too harsh on yourselves.
For sure. Okay, so final question to round this section off is, what would your top work-life balance advice be?
I think that's a brilliant question. And I think, first of all, to have a work-life balance, you need to have something that you love. And the reason why I say that is you may love your work, but your work can't love you back. So you need to have something. No, it's fact. It's absolute fact.
It's just I've never heard it been put that way before. So
you may love your work, but your work can't love you back. And so it's important that you have other things going on in your life. If you're going to live and be, and it's a danger that as a PhD, early career person, a student, there's a danger that you may become so consumed by this that it takes over your entire life. It takes over your thinking. You're thinking about it just before you go to bed. You go and you have nightmares about it, for goodness sakes. And then you wake up and the thought is still there in your mind. There's that danger. I would say it's always good to have something else that you do outside of your PhD, and not just a random thing, something that you genuinely love, something that you genuinely want to participate in. It's a good balancer, a good equalizer that will always just sort of be there in the background to say, you know what, pull back a little, focus on this so much, switch that off. Now it's your weekend. You're allowed to have a weekend. Turn off your email. Your supervisor is not going to sack you if you don't respond straight away. You have all these checks and balances and regulatory processes put into place by your institution. Therefore, if your supervisor is being disproportionately poor in terms of not allowing you to have your time, you will be protected by the institution. So actually don't let these things set your anxiety off, but genuinely saying the best way for me anyway, to have a work-life balance is to have something that you love outside of work.
So what follows on nicely from having something to love outside of work is what your passions actually are outside of science. So, Dr. Wilson, what do you like to do in your leisure time?
I like building people. You want hobbies, or do you want the big sort of like projects that are involving?
Well, building people, like, are we talking mentoring or Legos?
Mentoring. Currently I mentor a group of, I think last count it was 57 young people between the ages of 14 and 25. And and I think it's a great thing to be involved in terms of seeing people develop and seeing people advanced in life. I briefly touched on that earlier. And for me as well, it's those individuals who probably would normally be left behind, either by the educational system, either have had a stint in prison, maybe from they were age 18 or whatever it may be. Just life has just gone wrong somewhere along the lines. It's about really engaging with those individuals, actually seeing what they're good at and begin to help them to sort of navigate their way into a better life. And we've had great successes so far. We've seen people going off to medical schools, people going off to study law, people starting jobs, starting their own businesses, etc. Just transformational stories of lives being changed and turned around, and I just think it's incredible. And that for me is rewarding. You can see real life results unfolding in front of your very eyes.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's really admirable. Wow. Yeah, I knew you did mentoring, but I didn't realize it was on this scale. So wow, that's really, kudos to you. Well done. What are you a passionate advocate for?
Justice. And justice, it just sounds like a broad term. Justice to me simply means what is equitable. What's the right thing to do? And there is so much right now around, especially thinking ahead. And I'm somebody who likes to think ahead. And we're all sort of hoping and praying for that day when COVID will just go away. And I hear people talk about life returning to normal. There's no such thing as life returning to normal. I certainly don't believe that. I think we need to take a view that there's going to be a new normal. What will that new normal look like? During this pandemic, we've seen a lot. We've seen a lot of jobs go, businesses closing. That's livelihoods destroyed already. We've seen or we've heard of the impact of the pandemic on people's mental health, in that being locked away at home, and some people were isolating by themselves, and just the devastating impact that's had on them. We've seen educational disparities emerging in terms of schools being closed, and poor children not having access to internet or electronic devices, being able to sort of continue their schoolwork at home, and the challenges that parents, especially parents from single parent households, have had in terms of schooling multiple children. What's that going to look like after all of this? We're going to emerge into a society whereby we'll still have a mental health pandemic to deal with. We're going to emerge into a society where we'll still have educational disparities to deal with. We're going to emerge into a society where we will still have lives that are being destroyed, businesses that we knew just no longer there. How are we going to put the employment rate back up, and what impact is that's going to have going on forward? And I think for me, it's how do you respond to people in that setting? What's the right thing to do? Can we still have this approach where there will be those who have and those who do not? Or can we now begin to see society as a much more balanced place, whereby those who do have begin to think, you know what, things have changed so much. How can we advocate in order to actually make sure that everybody have at least a decent existence in our society? This should have taught us that when we're affected, we're all really affected. So going forward, why can't we just pull each other up? And so for me, that's justice. The right thing to do would be to make sure that nobody gets left behind. And I do a lot of community engagement stuff as well, community organization, and through all of that, I will certainly be advocating for doing what is right when this is said and done. It's about imagination. And when we talk about imagination, the imagination is not concerned with whether or not all the factors are in place, whether you know all the right people, whether you have all the right money, and so on and so forth. The imagination doesn't care about that. The imagination just cares about, can you see something being done about this? And if you can imagine that world, that's justice.
Fair enough. So you're somebody who mentors a lot, but I suppose there's a lot of people out there who would either like to be mentored or who would like to be a mentor. What makes a good mentor, and what should you look for, what makes a good mentor, and what should you look for in a mentor?
The answer is simple for me. A good mentor is somebody who can see you not only for where you are, but for where you can get to. I think mentors should be forecasters. I think mentors should be futuristic in their thinking, in being able to see you at a certain place, and also being able to skillfully navigate you towards that place. And there's another side to that as well. That may sound great and wonderful, but there's a humility that comes with it as well. There's this humble part of it. Not only should they see you, forecast where you could be, like a skilled weather forecaster. Tomorrow it will rain. It should be able to say, you know what, tomorrow Alex will be this, or whatever your name is, man should be this and woman should be this. Let's just go for that now. Or if you're non-binary, you should be this as well. It's being able to sort of like see where somebody can be and get to. In doing so, I said there's a humility side, and it is this. What if you're forecasting for an individual sees them surpassing you and doing better than you? Could you stand the heat in the kitchen there, mates, after that? There's this humility now that says, you know what? I need to mentor you to the point where you surpass me, and I'll be comfortable with it. And here's where it gets real humble now. I need to mentor you to the point that if one day I need a job, I'm happy for you to be my employer.
So what should you look for in a mentor?
Look for people who don't necessarily see themselves as mentor. I think if anyone comes to you and says, "I'm a mentor,"
yeah, he's like, no thanks, sorry.
I always question that to people who don't see themselves as such, but maybe they're people that you admire, and you see something in them.
Would you ask them like straight up, would you be my mentor? How would you go about facilitating a mentorship relationship?
Okay, it's a good question. I think, obviously, be honest. Ask, I'd like you to be my mentor. I've heard this about you. I've seen this about you. I actually think that you have a lot that you could contribute to my journey, and I'd like you to sort of help me there. Be humble about it. Say that I'm not placing any great expectations on you, or that you're going to give me some big revelation or whatever it may be. It's just that I just feel that you would be good and beneficial for where I'm at right now in life. It's just a conversation like that. It's nothing difficult. And then, if the person is reticent, say like, are you at least willing to see how it goes? Mm-hmm. So given the trial period, and I will say this to you as well, that if you're in it and you find that it's not working out, you're not locked in, or you're not obliged to retain.
No, you're not.
But have that honest conversation and said, you know what, I think I've gotten from you all that I can get from you. I appreciate your time and your effort. And then, you move on.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. Mm-hmm. So I'd now like just to get your final thoughts. So I'm going to give you a couple of questions, and again, love to hear what you've got to say. So what would your advice be to young people right now? It's very general and broad. Yeah, very general and broad. What would it be?
I think it's a cliche that we normally have, in that we say, young people, you are the future. I'm going to change that up slightly and say, you are the now. And I think, based on what's happened recently, I think coming out of this, I think for me, it's put at the forefront that you are so needed to build society, to rebuild society. You are so needed to sort of make the next level, the next advances that are going to be required. And you are actually, you're mavericks, you're rebellious, you don't obey the rules, you question the authority. I'm not saying this is the general for every young person, but I'm just going with some of the trends that we see. You question the authorities on their decision making. Prior to all of this, you were engaged in the political process, whether it be Brexit or the election of a new prime minister. We saw all of this. We see people coming through being passionate about things like climate change and other things. And even on a sort of racial point, we see people protesting, black and whites and people from every background, protesting that Black Lives Matter, going on these marches, etc. And it just tells me that there's sort of a movement. It's probably not all that it should be at the moment out there. There's this movement that can pretty much revolutionize society as we know it, change the political landscape as we know it, change the social landscape as we know it. And I would say to young people, find your voice. If you're passionate about something, be heard about it. Say what you need to see. Get around like-minded individuals. Have the conversation. Get around individuals also who are not like-minded, so that they can sort of shape you and give you different perspectives in your thinking, so that you can now apply to a wider and a more diverse audience. And I'll say to young people, if you're black, get some white friends. If you're white, get some black friends. Move out of the cultural silos, etc. Because the world that we're emerging into, it's all of us who are going to build it together. And I just want you to think globally and not locally.
Very well said. Couldn't agree more. How do you see the future of convergence science?
It's brilliant. Everybody's going to want to do convergent science. I know your degree in particular, it's multidisciplinary.
It is indeed.
But it's probably not as integrated, or you don't get the level of disciplinary integration that I would call convergence, in that you're probably not giving equal weighting to the different parts of your degree. And correct me if I'm wrong, that's just an assumption I'm making right now, in that you probably spend more time doing biology than you do the other pieces.
Yeah, to be fair, it's more of a means to an end. A lot of the so the bioengineering stuff I do is more of getting the system set up, and there is a lot of the chemistry, surface chemistry, a lot of yeah, modifications and chemical bioengineering techniques that go into producing my microfluidic devices, and obviously the engineering of flow systems and all of this, but. Yeah, I suppose the more novel thing, because that's stuff that's yeah, like is all involved in the setting up, and it's then all about the cell culture for me and the personalization of medicine, and running drug trials, like speeding the whole process of drug development up, reducing the cost. So yeah, so for me, mine is more interdisciplinary than convergent, even though there is a significant degree of convergence. Yeah, I don't measure my time, like I don't say like a 50% or 60% here. I just, yeah, everything is done on a needs basis. So yeah, I wouldn't refer to being a convergent scientist. I would say I'm an interdisciplinary scientist.
That, and
Which
and that's fine, Alex. I think it sounds great what you're doing, and I do think that the skills you picked up from the different disciplines are going to actually be helpful in terms of what you try to transition to later on. But for convergent science is great. I think everybody's going to want to do convergent science. I think we're going to have a fantastic generation of scientists coming through, young scientists who've been trained in that way. They're just going to set the trend, and then everyone's going to think, oh, I want to learn engineering too. I want to learn physics too. And for our clinicians, they're no longer just thinking about clinical practice based on human anatomy, physiology, whatever. They're thinking about clinical practice based on artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. And so therefore, if they can have a wider awareness or understanding of how different disciplines interact with clinical decision making, that's going to revolutionize clinical space as well, diagnosis, and treatment of diseases, for example. This is where the world is going, in that you're going to have people who have a broader understanding of how things work across the board. Yeah, that's my future. That's my hope anyway.
do you think that convergent science will not just be something at PhD level, and it's something that will be taught at other levels as well? And then, so as a bachelor's degree, so this, where do the boundaries begin to get mixed? What stage would you start blending all of that in?
I think if you're ever interested in student training and everything around that, you should apply for a job with us. So I do think that you are painting a vision here, which is incredible, and it's just sort of like in line with our thinking. I do think it'd be nice, and it's something that we're consulting on. We can have a convergence science undergraduate degree. I do think that'd be nice, and it's something that is further down the pipeline. But in terms of postdoctoral position in that area, what we do now as part of the Convergence Science Center where I work is we do award grants to undertake convergent science research, which can be undertaken by technicians or postdocs, whichever. We award grants to principal investigators to develop these systems working across multiple disciplines. So we're in a way, we're already in clinics, we're already in the PhD area, and of course we're now in the research area that takes place in labs and so on and so forth. I do think the next level then, as you've said before, is to get an undergraduate degree in this area as well. And also we have PIs as well who are getting large program grants in convergent science. So it's growing. Okay. It's absolutely growing.
Cool. Okay. This is a question I love asking on this podcast because I like the whole forecasting and seeing what the emerging trends are and stuff. So, in your opinion, which emerging trend do you see as having the greatest potential to affect any kind of change in science in general?
In science in general, I will always go back to artificial intelligence, and that the world has been taken over by computers, and it's interesting. Many would have seen news reports recently about AI outperforming radiologists in terms of diagnosing breast cancer. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there is no longer a space for humans or the human involvement in diagnosis. There will always be a space for that. But if we can increase and improve accuracy, if we can do this at a greater speed as well, I think that's exciting in being able to keep on top of certain types of diseases and this in case I'm speaking about cancer, and be able to sort of reduce fatalities and improve outcomes in general.
Yeah, well, it makes it sort of automates the process a little bit more, and I know people are a little bit distrustful of machines for whatever reason, but I also believe that that it's gonna the throughput is increased, and then it just means that instead of having to go every year for an annual physical, if you can afford that sort of thing, then I don't know, I think it just becomes a lot more accessible to people. And I also recently interviewed Professor Justin Mason for this podcast, and I put to him, it's interesting that you've mentioned PI, interesting that you mentioned AI, because I put to him about how what's the role of a doctor in future. And with emergence of AI technology, what are the implications for a doctor? And something that he said was that he thinks that it would free up doctors' time a lot more, so that they can do other things. And I think that's a really crucial thing, because convergent science is, there's always going to be innovation needed, I think, and innovation isn't going to come from staying in your lane. You've got to merge these lanes. You just have to, and which is again why I think what the clinical programs that you're doing are absolutely fantastic. But I do feel as though as well, when it comes to certain areas, there does need to be a degree of specialism. So you do have to be an expert. So I don't see personally. Going back to the future of convergent science, I'm not sure it will replace everything, but I do see a huge role for it. I don't know what you think.
Oh dear, you are a pessimist, Alex. So when you talk about speciality, I think the answer to that question is all our program currently is to address cancer. So your speciality or your specialism is cancer. So everyone who comes through will effectively, you can call them a cancer scientist, because that is the common ground. That's the foundation of it. That's the issue that's been addressed, and these different disciplines merge together in order to apply and address that issue. So ultimately, that's the specialty. So it does answer that question. I think when we look at distinct diseases, we may need to begin to think now, actually, how is it that different disciplines can merge together to address these disciplines and the big problems that are associated with these different diseases. And that's why I'm excited about the future and the prospects of convergence research. I do think that we will see this just taking on more scope, and it's something that you're going to see other funding. This is something that's funded currently by Cancer Research UK, something you're going to see other funders doing very soon as well.
I'm sure. So then just going back to the idea of AI, so how, if you could forecast in 50 years' time, how has AI shaped research as we know it now?
Well, that's a very good question. Gosh, in 50 years' time. I think something you mentioned was about the automation of things, and just be able to get things done much more rapidly. One of the things that I'm always mindful of is this idea. So for example, when you started in the lab, we kind of had this semi-automated way of extracting genetic material, and that we had these spin columns, etc. When I started in the lab, that didn't exist. Well, they did. They did. It's just that there was this reticence from principal investigators because they had the more crude and traditional way of doing things. And by learning to do things in the traditional way, it actually, in a way, makes you a better scientist, because you can troubleshoot much more effectively. You know every single step. It's not being done in a column or through some automated way.
But that's it. With these spin columns, you know roughly like what they do. I mean, for anyone out there, these spin columns essentially have a membrane inside of them, and then genetic material binds to it, and then you clean it, and then you get your purified sample.
Yeah, but they come nicely packaged with all the buffers and every reagent that you need. Yeah, you never had to learn how to make those up for yourselves. You have to do the dilutions, the calculations, etc.
No.
And the thing is, when you lose that, and then maybe I'm just a bit old-fashioned, when you lose all of that skill set for the sake of automation, something can go wrong one day in that there's a manufacturing problem, and you still have some critical work which needs to be undertaken in the lab, but you just don't know where to start to get your genetic material, because you always relied on that semi-automation process. And I think perhaps going forward, if we get down that route of everything becomes automated, artificial intelligence rules the world and take over scientific developments and discoveries and so on and so forth, I think we will lose a lot of core skills and training. It is exciting, but however, I think we need to have this balance as to where the human approach is and where the AI approach can come in as well, and begin to see where these things can work effectively well together. Because you can never have science and science being pushed forward without human involvement being the major driving force.
No, I agree. So I was just wondering, I had somewhat of a left field, potentially ridiculous thought, but obviously there's a lot of companies out there, including Elon Musk's Neuralink company, and they're looking at essentially creating brain computer interfaces, right? So do you think that at such a point this technology could be so advanced that we're constantly almost linked into the matrix and we're always linked into the AIs?
One thing I've learned to say recently is that nothing is impossible.
I'm sure that's the Adidas slogan or something like that. Or what is it? Impossible is nothing. That's
okay. That's interesting. That's interesting. Nothing is impossible. I think we used to see these things from Star Trek films. I think it was in the 60s or whatever. And then suddenly they became Motorola phones, mobile phones. And we just see technologies always advancing, always moving. Some of the things that we think currently are the forefront and the cutting edge because they're available on the market is actually way behind in terms of some of the things that are behind the scenes that are actually being worked at already and are actually near the stage of being rolled out. In that there's always advancement taking place. And so is that impossible to see? I don't think that is impossible to see. I think where that becomes challenging is whether or not it be readily utilized, taken up by the public. But I think gradually as we have children, and one thing you may notice about younger children nowadays is that you don't need to teach them how to use a phone or an iPad or anything like that. You just pop a tablet in front of them and they get on with it immediately.
No, you need to teach the old folks that.
So basically, it's a complete reverse. It's a generation being born and knowing how to do and how to use technology. They're already technologically savvy. So I think with that said, as you have a generation which is just more primed to think in a very technological way, maybe then the idea of interface technology with humanity, etc., isn't such a strange idea for them because they get plugged into another virtual world with their Xbox and whatever other games that they play. So it's not that dissimilar to think, or not that far-fetched rather, to think that this could happen. There will be those who are hesitant, and they will have their own good reasons, but I do think there'll be those who are just constantly embracing technological advancements. So it's not impossible.
I think it brings with it a whole other set of issues involving privacy and all of this. But
and that's the main problem here. And if you could see me now, I'm holding a pen in my hand and I'm pointing it in the air frantically. That's the main problem. Privacy, data collection, data storage. What is done with all that information? Where does it go? What can it be utilized for? And that ultimately becomes the issue, especially around artificial intelligence in a clinical setting. And we know that Google DeepMind, for example, is involved in some of these AI developments. It's sort of like, who owns that patient data? Where does it go? True. What is it used for? And these are
but you saw what they did recently with the protein. What was it? The artificial intelligence program can now predict protein structure from a sequence, which this is a process that back in the 70s, 80s used to take 5 years doing X-ray crystallography and all of these other like fancy techniques. Google DeepMind can just do it like straight away, and the potential for things like directed enzyme evolution or just anything involved with proteins is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. So So, very, very, very final question. I've really enjoyed our talk so far today. It's been, really eye-opening, and I hope all of the listeners has as well. So, the very final question is, if you could do it all over again, what what would you keep the same, and then what would you change?
I wouldn't change a thing.
A man with no regrets.
I wouldn't change a thing. I think, looking back at all of it, I really like the person I'm becoming. I've not become, I'm becoming. I think it's always a journey. I like my personality. I like my thought approach to scenario, situation, life in general. I think all the journeys, the ups and the downs, they've all sort of converged. See how I got that word in there? They've all converged to sort of like make me into the individual that I am right now. Undertaking the PhD, the undergraduate degree, moving to a new country, deciding to leave science research and coming into the space that I'm in right now, mentoring other people, wanting to advocate for causes of justice, etc. All of that didn't just randomly come about because I sat down one day and said, oh, you know what, that would be a nice thing. I think the entire process of the journey has sort of been a mixing pot of ingredients that have been, when stirred correctly, has emerged into this beautiful flavor something. And that's why I like it now. And I think as a result, I wouldn't change it. I think I have no regrets, and I just hope it gets better going forward. But so far, I think it's been good.
It's been very good for you, and you've done incredibly well. You should be incredibly proud of your achievements and where you are today. So I'd just like to round off by, again, saying thank you very, very much for your time, and really appreciate it. Cheers, Garrick.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate that.
I can't thank Garrick enough for giving up his time to do this podcast. It was such a thorough and passionate discussion, and I really enjoyed hearing his thoughts. To be mentoring so many young people is truly admirable, and I'm really proud of all that Garrick does for young people. Good for him. The next episode is going to be the final episode of the series. It will be released on the 28th of July, and it's going to feature Dr. Lucy Lowe of the NIH, where we will talk all about organs on chips in space. That's right, in space. It's a completely fascinating area of research, and Lucy brings it alive in such an inspiring fashion, so don't miss it. Please make sure to keep subscribing and following us on Twitter and YouTube, and also rate us on your podcast platform, as this helps us out a huge deal with metrics and will be very much appreciated. Until next time!